The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, a sharp contrast to the wine-colored satin of her expensive robe. Chelsea didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting toward my son, Robert, pleading for a rescue that wasn't coming. I stood in the center of the precinct waiting room, my spine a steel rod, feeling the weight of my expired commander's badge in my pocket. Behind me, my grandson Ethan was a trembling shadow, his eyebrows split and weeping blood onto a makeshift bandage. The young desk officer who had moments ago treated me like a nuisance was now standing at attention, his face ashen. I didn't need to say a word. The silence in the room was heavy with the sudden, violent realization that they hadn't just brought in a scared teenager. They had brought in the family of Elellanena Stone. And in this city, even 10 years into retirement, that name still carried the scent of a storm. It was 2:47 a.m. when my phone shattered the silence of my home. At that hour, no call ever brings good news. Never. I reached out in the dark, fumbling on the nightstand until I found the cell phone. The screen illuminated my face with that cold glare that abruptly drags you back to reality. It was Ethan, my grandson, the only one who still called me grandma without anyone forcing him to. My voice was hoarse with sleep, but my heart was already pounding as if it knew something was terribly wrong. Ethan, my boy, what happened? What I heard on the other end chilled my blood. Grandma, his voice was shaking, broken by sobs. I'm at the police station. Chelsea, she hit me with a candlestick. My eyebrow is bleeding. But she's saying that I attacked her, that I pushed her down the stairs. My dad believes her. Grandma, he doesn't believe me. I felt the air leave my lungs. I sat up in bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. Ethan's words ricocheted in my head like stray bullets. Chelsea. My son's wife. The woman who, in 5 years, had achieved what I thought was impossible, turning Rob into a stranger. Calm down, my boy. Which police station are you at? The one in Greenwich Village. Grandma, I'm scared. There's an officer who says if a responsible adult doesn't come, they're going to transfer me to. Don't say another word, I interrupted him, already standing, searching for my clothes with trembling hands. I'm on my way. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. Did you understand me? Yes, Grandma. He hung up, and I stood there in the middle of my room, holding the phone as if it were the only real thing in that moment. My reflection in the closet mirror stared back at me, a woman of 68 with disheveled gray hair and deep circles under her eyes. But I didn't see a frightened old lady. I saw Commander Elellanena Stone, the same woman who had worked in criminal investigations for 35 years, the same one who had interrogated criminals, solved impossible cases, and faced situations that would make anyone tremble. And for the first time in 8 years since my retirement, I felt that woman awaken again. I dressed in less than 5 minutes, black slacks, gray sweater, my comfortable boots. I grabbed my purse and almost by instinct opened the drawer of my dresser. There it was, my expired commander badge. I put it in my back pants pocket. I didn't know if it would help, but something told me I was going to need it tonight. When I stepped outside, the city was shrouded in that thick silence that only exists in the early hours of the morning. I stopped a taxi on the main avenue. The driver, a man in his 50s, looked at me through the rearview mirror. Where to, ma'am? Greenwich Village precinct. And hurry, please. It's an emergency. He nodded and sped up. I stared out the window without really seeing anything. I only thought about Ethan, his broken voice, the words he had told me. My dad doesn't believe me. Rob. My son. The boy I had raised alone after his father abandoned us when he was just 3 years old. The man to whom I gave everything, education, values, unconditional love. The same one who, 5 years ago, had stopped visiting me, who had stopped calling me, who had erased me from his life as if I had never existed. And all because of her. Because of Chelsea. He met her at a casino, where she worked as a dealer. He had just become a widower, devastated by the death of his first wife, Ethan's mother. Chelsea appeared like a saving angel, young, beautiful, attentive, too perfect. I saw it from the beginning. I saw the way she looked at him, not with love, but with calculation, like someone evaluating an investment. But Rob was blind. He needed to fill the void left by his wife's death, and Chelsea knew exactly how to fill it. Slowly, she began planting doubts in his head. Your mother is too controlling, honey. She never lets you make your own decisions. She's always judging you. At first, Rob defended me. But drops of poison, when they fall one after another, end up contaminating even the purest water. The taxi stopped in front of the precinct, a gray two-story building with the lights on. I paid the driver and got out. My legs were shaking, not from fear, but from contained rage. I entered through the main door. The desk officer, a young man about 25 years old, looked up from his desk. Good evening. How can I help you? I'm here for Ethan Stone, my grandson. He called me half an hour ago. The officer checked a sheet in front of him. Ah, yes, the domestic assault case. Are you his grandmother? Elellanena Stone. Something changed in his face when he heard my name. He turned slightly pale. He looked at me more closely, as if trying to remember something. Stone? Like Commander Stone? I took out my expired badge from my pocket and placed it on the desk. The officer took it, looked at it, and his expression changed completely. He stood up immediately. My God. Commander, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were family. Allow me. Where is my grandson? My voice came out firm, without hesitation. The same voice I had used hundreds of times to interrogate, to order, to make people understand that I was not playing games. In the waiting room, with his parents and, well, with the complainant. Captain Spencer is in charge of the case. Spencer? That name made me pause for a second. Charles Spencer? He had been one of my subordinates years ago. A good officer, fair, intelligent. Take me to him. If you have ever watched a person you love turn into someone you no longer recognize, hit the like button so I know I am not the only one fighting this kind of battle. The officer led me down a hallway that I knew like the back of my hand. I had walked these same floors hundreds of times during my career. We arrived at the waiting room, and there, in that cold space illuminated by fluorescent lights, I saw the scene that would change everything. Ethan was sitting on a plastic chair, his right eyebrow clumsily bandaged with gauze. His eyes were red from crying so much. When he saw me, he jumped up. Grandma. He ran toward me and hugged my waist as he did when he was a child. I felt his body tremble against mine. I stroked his hair and whispered, I'm here, my boy. I'm here. But my gaze had already found the other two characters in that scene. Rob was standing by the wall, arms crossed and jaw clenched. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, shame, anger, guilt. And next to him, sitting with her legs crossed and a perfectly rehearsed victim expression, was Chelsea. She wore a wine-colored satin robe, as if she had been dragged out of bed. She had a bruise on her left arm that looked freshly made. Her brown hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders. She looked at me with those big, teary eyes as if to say, look what your grandson did to me. But I knew that look. I had seen it in dozens of criminals who tried to fool me during my career. The look of someone who knows how to act. Someone who knows how to manipulate. Elellanena, Rob said in a dry voice, without moving from his spot. You didn't have to come. Those 5 words hurt me more than any physical blow. I didn't have time to respond, because at that moment an office door opened and a man in his 50s came out in an impeccable uniform and a serious expression. Captain Charles Spencer. When he saw me, he stopped short. Commander Stone. Hello, Charles, I said calmly. It's been a while. He approached, clearly surprised. No. I didn't know you were involved in this case. If I had known, Now you know, I interrupted him. And I need you to explain exactly what's going on here. Because something told me that what I had heard on the phone was only the tip of the iceberg. Spencer took me to his office. Ethan came with me, clinging to my hand as if he feared I would disappear. Rob and Chelsea stayed in the waiting room. I could feel my son's gaze fixed on my back, but I didn't turn around. Spencer's office was small but tidy. A metal desk, 2 chairs in front of it, a filing cabinet in the corner. Not much had changed since my time. "Sit down, please," Spencer said, closing the door behind us. I sat in one of the chairs, and Ethan settled next to me. His gaze was lowered, his hands clasped in his lap. Spencer sat on the other side of the desk and opened a folder. He sighed before speaking. "Commander, the situation is complicated." "Explain the facts to me," I said, without beating around the bush. "Her version first." Spencer nodded and consulted his notes. Ms. Chelsea Brooks filed the complaint at 11:43 p.m. She alleges that, at approximately 10:30 p.m., the minor Ethan returned home after his permitted time. When she reprimanded him, he reacted violently, pushed her down the stairs, and hit her arm. She has bruises that partially match her story. Every word was like a needle sticking into my chest. I looked at Ethan. His head was still bowed, but I saw his hands trembling. "And my grandson's version?" I asked, although from Spencer's tone, I already knew that no one had believed him. "The minor alleges that Ms. Brooks was the one who assaulted him first. He says that when he arrived home, she was already angry, that she waited for him in the living room, and without saying a word, hit him with a blunt object, according to him, a silver candlestick. The wound on his eyebrow required 3 stitches. Did you check for the candlestick?" Spencer shook his head, uncomfortable. "MS. Brooks says that such an object doesn't exist, that the boy invented that story to justify his aggression. And here comes the problem, Commander. The house security cameras were broken that night. Just that night." I leaned back in the chair, processing the information. It wasn't a coincidence. None of this was. "How convenient, right?" I murmured. Spencer looked at me with that expression I knew well, the look of someone who knows something is not right, but doesn't have enough evidence to act. "The cameras had been broken for 3 days," he said. "According to the husband, they were going to call the technician this week." Of course not. Chelsea had planned this perfectly. Every detail, every move. This wasn't a fit of anger. It was premeditated. I turned to Ethan, put my hand over his. "Look at me, son." He slowly looked up. His eyes were full of fear and shame. "Tell me everything from the beginning. And don't hide anything from me." Ethan swallowed. He looked at Spencer, then at me again. I was late because I stayed studying at a friend's house. I have a math test on Monday. I got home at 10:15 p.m. Not that late. But when I opened the door, Chelsea was there in the living room with the lights off. Only the kitchen light was on. His voice began to crack, but he continued. She said, "You're late, you insolent brat." I told her I had texted my dad. She laughed and showed me my dad's phone. She had it. My dad was asleep. Then she said, "Your father doesn't care about you. Nobody cares about you. You're an annoyance in this house." Tears started rolling down his cheeks. "I just wanted to go up to my room, Grandma. I swear to you." But she grabbed my arm and pulled me. I tried to break free, and then she took the candlestick from the table and hit me here. He pointed to his bandaged eyebrow. I felt everything spin. I fell to the floor. And while I was lying there bleeding, she gave herself the bruises by hitting herself against the wall. I saw her, Grandma. I saw her do it. Where was your father? Asleep in his room. She had given him some chamomile tea because he said he was stressed. When he heard the noise and came downstairs, Everything was already set up. Chelsea was crying, saying I had attacked her. My dad didn't even ask me. He just yelled that I was a disgrace and called the police. I closed my eyes for a moment. I took a deep breath. The rage I felt was like a fire contained in my chest. And the candlestick? She hid it before my dad came down. I don't know where she put it. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Spencer. Charles, you knew my work for 20 years. Did you ever see me let an innocent person pay for something they didn't do? Never, Commander. My grandson is telling the truth. And I'm going to prove it. Spencer rubbed his face with both hands. Elellanena, legally, my hands are tied. It's the word of a minor against that of 2 adults. The father supports the wife's version. I don't have physical evidence to contradict their story. The only thing I can do is let him go under your temporary custody while the investigation proceeds. Do it. I'll take responsibility. Spencer took out some papers and began filling them out. Meanwhile, I watched Ethan. That boy had grown so much in the last year. He was 16, almost a man. But at that moment, huddled in that chair with a broken eyebrow and swollen eyes, he was once again the 7-year-old boy who cried in my arms when his mother died. How long has this been going on, Ethan? I asked in a low voice. He looked down again. What, Grandma? Don't ask me that question. You know what I'm referring to. There was a long silence. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Ethan spoke, so softly I barely heard him. For 6 months. What started 6 months ago? It started with insults. Then she started breaking my things, my video game console, my notebooks, a soccer trophy you gave me. She said they were accidents. My dad believed her. Then she started hitting me. Slaps, shoves. Once she locked me in the basement all afternoon because I said I wanted to come see you. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I was afraid that if I told you, my dad would be more angry with you. I thought that if I put up with it a little longer, things would get better. But today was different. I saw something in her eyes, Grandma. I realized that she wants me to disappear. Spencer finished filling out the papers and handed them to me. I signed without reading, trusting him. Then he stood up. I'm going to call your son to also sign the release of the minor. Wait here. He left the office. Ethan and I were left alone. I hugged him, this time even tighter. I felt his body relax against mine, as if for the first time in hours he could breathe easy. Forgive me, my boy. Forgive me for not realizing sooner. It's not your fault, Grandma. It's my dad who didn't want to see. He was right. But that didn't make it hurt any less. The door opened. Rob entered alone. He didn't even look at me. He walked up to the desk, took the pen Spencer extended to him, and signed the papers with quick, jerky movements. That's it, he said dryly. Can I go? Rob, I said, standing up. We need to talk. I have nothing to talk about with you, he replied without turning around. You made your choice. You chose to believe him instead of my wife. Your wife? What about your son? When did your own son stop mattering to you? He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes chilled my blood. There was no love. There was no guilt. There was just nothing. A void I didn't recognize. My son attacked my wife. The evidence is there. Chelsea has the bruises. He has a history of bad behavior at school. What history? Ethan exploded. That's a lie. I've never had problems at school. You were suspended last week for fighting with a classmate. Because that classmate was bothering a girl. He was harassing her and I defended her. The principal congratulated me after speaking with the witnesses. Rob didn't answer. He simply turned around and left the office, closing the door with a loud bang. I stood there, feeling every piece of hope I had of getting my son back crumble. Spencer put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Elellanena." "Don't be sorry," I replied, wiping away a tear that had escaped without permission. He made his choice. Now I'm going to make mine. I took Ethan's hand. "Let's go home." We left the precinct into the cold early morning. Chelsea and Rob had already left. On the empty street, under the orange glow of the streetlights, I stopped for a moment. Ethan looked at me. "What are we going to do, Grandma?" I looked into his eyes, those eyes that so resembled his mother's. Good. Noble. Incapable of lying. "We are going to prove the truth, my boy. And we are going to make her pay for every tear she made you shed. Because Chelsea made a mistake tonight, a mistake that will cost her everything. She messed with my grandson. And no one, absolutely no one, hurts my family without me doing something about it." Commander Elellanena Stone was back, and this time there was no retirement that could stop me. We arrived at my house when the sun was barely beginning to peek out between the buildings. Ethan walked silently beside me, dragging his feet from fatigue and pain. I lived in a modest apartment in Greenwich Village, a third floor without an elevator that I had bought with my life savings. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every dish, every memory on those walls belonged to me. I opened the door and turned on the lights. The familiar smell of coffee and cinnamon greeted me. I always left a stick of cinnamon on the stove so the house would smell like home. "Come sit on the couch," I said to Ethan. "I'm going to make you something to eat." "I'm not hungry, Grandma." "I didn't ask if you were hungry. I said I'm going to make you something." He managed a weak smile and collapsed onto the brown fabric sofa. It was old, but comfortable. I went to the kitchen and heated milk. I prepared 2 cups of hot chocolate, the way my mother taught me when I was a girl. I returned to the living room with everything on a tray. Ethan took the cup in his hands and sipped. He closed his eyes, savoring it. "Thank you, Grandma. Eat slowly. Then I'll give you something for the pain in your eyebrow." I sat beside him and drank my chocolate in silence. Outside, the city was beginning to wake up. "Grandma," Ethan said after a while, "can I stay with you?" "Of course. For as long as you need." "No, I mean, forever. I don't want to go back to that house. Not with her there." I placed my cup on the coffee table and looked at him. "Ethan, legally your father has custody. I can only have you temporarily until the case is resolved. If you want to stay with me permanently, we'll have to do things properly, with lawyers, with judges. But my dad will never agree. We don't know until we try." He shook his head. "He does everything Chelsea tells him. Since they got married, it's like my dad is a different person. Do you know what I heard a week ago?" "What did you hear?" Ethan lowered his voice as if someone could hear us. They were in their room. I was going to the bathroom and passed their door. It was slightly ajar. Chelsea was talking on the phone with someone. She was saying, "Don't worry. Everything is going according to plan. When the old lady dies, Rob will inherit the house. We'll sell it and get at least $4.5 million. I felt the blood boil inside me. "Are you sure of what you heard?" "Completely sure, Grandma. That's why, that night when I came home late and she attacked me, I knew it was part of her plan. She wants to push me away from you. She wants you to see me as a problem. And when I'm no longer in the way, all that's left is to wait for you." He didn't finish the sentence. Chelsea was planning my death. Or at least she was waiting for me to die soon. And in the meantime, she was going to destroy any bond that existed between my son and me. Between Ethan and his father. "Did you say anything to your father?" I tried. I told him what I had heard. Do you know what he told me? That I was making things up. That I was a resentful teenager. That Chelsea had been very patient with me. The helplessness I felt in that moment was crushing. My own son. The boy I had raised to be fair and honest, was completely blinded. You are not making anything up, Ethan. And I believe every word. He leaned his head on my shoulder and sighed. Why does she hate us so much, Grandma? Because the hatred of people like Chelsea doesn't come from the heart. It comes from ambition. For her, you and I are obstacles, things that stand between her and what she wants. And what does she want? Money. Power. An easy life without working for it. I fell silent, thinking. When Rob met Chelsea, she told him she came from a wealthy family in Dallas. But we never met her family. No relative ever came to the wedding. Ethan, I need you to do me a favor. Anything, Grandma. Take out your phone. Show me the photos of the bruises you said you had from before. He took his cell phone out of his pocket, unlocked the screen, and opened his gallery. He showed me a hidden folder in his files. There were at least 20 photos, bruises on his arms, on his back, on his legs. All recent, all dated. Why did you never show me this? Because I was afraid that if I did something, my dad would blame you. Chelsea always says that you're turning me against them. Send me all those photos. Now. My phone started vibrating as the images arrived. Every photo was proof. Every mark was a silent cry for help that no one had heard until now. Now I need you to sleep a little, I told him. Your eyebrow is swollen and you need to rest. Use my room. I'll stay here on the couch. But Grandma, no buts. Go to sleep. He got up and went to my room. I was left alone in the living room with my cell phone in my hand and the photos of my bruised grandson filling the screen. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a drawer and took out an old leather-bound notebook. It was my investigation notebook, the same one I used when I was on active duty. I looked for a specific name. Linda Davis. Linda had been my partner for 10 years. When I retired, she opened her own private investigation agency. I dialed her number. It rang 4 times before she answered. Hello? Her voice sounded sleepy. Linda, it's Elellanena Stone. Commander. I haven't heard from you in ages. What time is it? 6:30 a.m. I'm sorry to wake you, but I need your help. It's urgent. Tell me. I told her everything. When I finished, Linda let out a long whistle. That woman is a professional, Commander. What you're describing isn't a cruel stepmother. It's a con artist, and a good one. That's what I thought. I need to investigate her. Full name, date of birth, everything you have. Chelsea Brooks. 32 years old, according to what Rob told me. They got married 5 years ago. That's enough for me. Give me 2 days. I'll check her background, previous marriages, financial history. If she has a past to hide, I'll find it. Thank you, Linda. Don't thank me yet. This is going to take work. And if we find something big, we're going to need more than good intentions to act. We hung up. I kept looking at my phone. Then I looked around my small living room. This house was not worth $4.5 million. It was worth much more. It was worth every drop of sweat I had shed working double shifts to buy it. It was worth every sacrifice, every sleepless night. And Chelsea thought she could just take it away from me. She thought she could manipulate my son, torture my grandson, and wait for my death like someone waiting for a check. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was tinged with orange and pink. A new day was beginning. And with it, my battle. Because Chelsea didn't know something. I was Elellanena Stone, and she had just declared a war I was going to make sure she lost. What secret was Chelsea hiding? Why so much hatred toward an innocent boy? The truth was darker than I imagined. The investigation into Chelsea's past had already yielded enough filth to sink a battleship, but Linda and I both knew that in the high-stakes game of legal maneuvering, a pattern of behavior is just a story until you pin it down with a smoking gun. We were sitting in my kitchen, the air thick with the smell of overbrewed coffee and the silent tension of a stakeout. Linda pulled a fresh document from her folder, a property deed from 10 years ago. "This was the Miller estate," she said, her voice dropping into that low, professional register we used during midnight interrogations. "Chelsea didn't just inherit the house, she liquidated the assets through a shell company called Blue Horizon Holdings." I leaned in, my eyes scanning the fine print. The signatory for the company wasn't Chelsea. It was a man named Gerald Hayes. I recognized the name immediately. Gerald Hayes was a bottom-feeder lawyer who specialized in what we used to call probate predation. He found the gaps in wills like a shark finding blood in the water. This wasn't just a series of unfortunate marriages, this was a business model. A sophisticated, calculated operation designed to drain the lifeblood out of grieving families. If Chelsea was the blade, Hayes was the hand that swung it. We were looking at a RICO-level conspiracy disguised as domestic tragedy. My mind raced through the tactical possibilities. We couldn't just go to the DA with old files and suspicions. We needed to catch them in the act of the current swindle. We needed to make them think they were winning. Ethan walked into the kitchen then, his face pale but his eyes burning with a hard, cold intelligence I hadn't seen in him before. He saw the photos on the table and didn't flinch. "Grandma, I found something in my old laptop backups," he said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "It's an audio file from 6 months ago. I accidentally left my voice recorder app running during dinner one night. I listened as the static cleared, and then I heard it. Chelsea's voice, sharp as a razor, telling Gerald Hayes on a speakerphone that the old lady's heart wouldn't last the winter if they kept up the pressure. It was cold, clinical, and utterly damning. If you've ever felt the hair on your arms stand up when you realized someone you trusted was a monster, hit the like button so I know I'm not the only one who has faced this darkness. I performed a calculated risk that would either break the case or get us all killed. I called Rob. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I used my commander voice, the one that leaves no room for debate. "Rob, I need you to bring Chelsea to my apartment tonight. No excuses. I have the papers for the house ready to sign." There was a long pause on the other end, the kind of silence that tells you a man is drowning and isn't sure if he wants to be saved. He agreed. I hung up and looked at Linda. We had 2 hours to turn my living room into a digital trap. We hid high-definition pinhole cameras in the bookshelf, the clock, and the base of a floor lamp. Every angle was covered. Every whispered word would be captured in lossless audio. When the doorbell rang at 7 p.m., the air in the apartment felt electrified. I opened the door to find Rob looking like a ghost of himself and Chelsea standing beside him, wearing a look of smug, predatory triumph. She walked into my home like she already owned the square footage. "Elellanena," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm so glad you finally decided to do what's best for everyone." I led them to the dining table where the decoy documents were spread out. Gerald Hayes was with them, his briefcase clicking open with the sound of a guillotine blade. He laid out a pen, a heavy, gold-plated thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. He started explaining the transfer of title, using dense legal jargon to mask the fact that they were essentially robbing me in broad daylight. I watched Chelsea's face as Gerald spoke. She wasn't even pretending to care about Rob anymore. She was staring at the deed, her eyes reflecting the greed of 100 successful heists. I leaned back, clutching my chest with a practiced tremor. "It's a lot to process," I whispered, making sure my voice was just weak enough to embolden her. Chelsea smirked, leaning in. "It's simple, really. You sign, we leave, and Ethan's little legal problem goes away. Otherwise, well, accidents happen to old women in big, lonely apartments." She said it with a smile, but her eyes were dead. At that moment, the power in the building flickered, a prearranged signal from Linda in the bedroom. The knowledge gap was closing. They didn't know the silent observers were recording every syllable of their extortion. The tension reached a breaking point. Gerald Hayes cleared his throat, sensing the shift in the room's energy. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Ms. Brooks," he said, trying to pull her back from the ledge of a full confession. But Chelsea was drunk on the prospect of $4.5 million. She didn't see the trap. She didn't see the tiny red light blinking behind the glass of the wall clock. She looked at Rob, who was sitting there with his head in his hands, and she actually laughed. "Don't be so dramatic, honey. Your mother is doing a noble thing. She's ensuring our future. She's making sure we have the capital we need for the Miami project." I picked up the pen, my hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of the sting. "I need to know one thing," I said, looking Chelsea directly in the eyes. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about Franklin Adams?" The room went ice cold. Gerald Hayes froze, his hand hovering over his briefcase. Chelsea's smile didn't falter, but it hardened into something brittle and dangerous. "I don't know who that is," she lied, but the hesitation in her pupils was all the evidence the cameras needed. I stood up then, the frail old lady act vanishing like smoke in a gale. I walked to the bedroom door and opened it. Linda stepped out, her laptop open, the live feed of their own faces staring back at them from the screen. Rob looked up, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and dawning realization. "What is this?" he stammered. I looked at my son, the man I had raised, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw the veil lift from his eyes. "It's the end of the line, Rob," I said, my voice echoing in the small room. The hallway outside erupted with the heavy thud of tactical boots. Captain Spencer and 4 uniformed officers burst through the door, their weapons drawn but lowered, their presence an absolute finality. Gerald Hayes tried to bolt for the fire escape, but he was tackled before he could even reach the window. Chelsea didn't move. She just stared at me, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "I've survived worse than you." I looked at her as the handcuffs clicked shut. "You haven't survived me," I said. "Because I'm not just a grandmother. I'm the woman who's going to make sure you never see the sun without bars in front of it again." The precinct interrogation room was a sterile box of white tile and buzzing fluorescent lights that stripped away the glamour Chelsea had spent years cultivating. She sat across from Captain Spencer, her wine-colored robe looking pathetic and stained under the harsh glare of the overheads. I watched through the one-way glass, my arms crossed, feeling the familiar hum of a closing case vibrating in my bones. Beside me, Rob was a broken man, his forehead pressed against the glass as he watched the woman he thought he loved reveal her true colors. Spencer tossed a folder onto the metal table, the sound like a gunshot in the cramped space. "We have the wire transfers, Chelsea," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We have the audio from the Stone apartment. And we have Gerald Hayes in the next room currently trading your head for a plea deal." Chelsea didn't flinch. She leaned back, a sneer curling her lip, her eyes fixed on the camera in the corner as if she knew I was on the other side of it. "You have nothing but a bitter old woman's vendetta," she spat. "That recording was coerced. The bank accounts are offshore. You can't touch me." Spencer didn't smile, but I saw the ghost of it in his eyes. "We found the candlestick, Chelsea. We found it in the crawlspace of the laundry room, wrapped in a towel soaked with Ethan's blood. And it has your prints all over the silver base." The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time, I saw the mask slip. The predatory confidence vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating panic. She looked down at her hands, realizing for the first time that the walls weren't just closing in. They were already touching. Rob turned away from the glass, his breath hitching in his throat. "I can't believe I brought her into our home," he whispered, the words thick with a self-loathing that would take years to wash away. I put my hand on his shoulder, the first time I had touched him without tension in a decade. "You were blinded by grief, Rob. People like her are experts at finding the cracks in a man's soul and filling them with concrete. But the concrete is cracking now. We had reached the point in this nightmare where the mystery wasn't how she did it, it was how many others were buried in her wake. Spencer leaned in closer to her, his voice a whisper. Tell me about Paul Vega, Chelsea. Tell me why a 26-year-old boy disappeared into thin air and why his father died 3 weeks later. If you have ever realized that the person sleeping next to you is a total stranger, hit the like button so I know I am not alone in this. The investigation moved with the cold efficiency of a forensic audit. While Chelsea sat in silence, Linda and I were back at the apartment, tearing through the digital footprint Gerald Hayes had left behind like a trail of breadcrumbs. We weren't just looking for fraud anymore, we were looking for the missing. Linda's fingers flew across the keyboard, her screen a blur of encrypted files and deleted metadata. Commander, I found a recurring payment, she said, her voice tight with adrenaline. Every month for the last 4 years, a wire goes from Chelsea's secret account to a private medical facility in upstate New York. It's labeled as long-term maintenance. I leaned over her shoulder, my heart skipping a beat. Who is the patient? The screen blinked, and a name appeared that made my blood run cold. Paul Vega. He wasn't dead. He was being held in a chemical fog, tucked away in a facility that didn't ask questions as long as the checks cleared. Chelsea hadn't just stolen his inheritance, she had stolen his life, keeping him in a vegetative state to ensure he could never contest the will. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't just greed. This was a level of depravity that even my 35 years on the force hadn't prepared me for. I picked up the phone and called Spencer. We found him, Charles. Get a tactical team to the Green Valley Sanitarium. Now. I looked at Ethan, who was sitting on the sofa, watching us with wide, hollow eyes. He was seeing the world for what it was, a place where monsters wore designer silk and spoke in whispers. We arrived at the sanitarium 3 hours later, the blue and red lights of the squad cars cutting through the midnight fog of the Hudson Valley. The facility was a grand, Gothic structure that felt more like a prison than a hospital. We pushed through the heavy oak doors, the smell of antiseptic and old dust filling my lungs. In room 402, we found him. Paul Vega was a shadow of the boy in the photos, his skin translucent, his eyes staring at a ceiling he hadn't seen clearly in years. I walked to his bedside and took his hand. It's over, Paul, I whispered. You're going home. Behind me, the sound of a camera shutter clicked, the forensic team documenting the final piece of Chelsea's empire. The knowledge gap was gone. We had the boy. We had the money. All that was left was the final reckoning. The quiet aftermath of the rescue brought a deceptive calm before the legal storm. 2 weeks had passed since the arrest, and the headlines were screaming about the Black Widow of New York. Chelsea and Hayes were being held without bail, their assets frozen, their legal team jumping ship as the scope of the horrors came to light. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the sunrise over the city, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. The silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of a house under siege, it was the silence of a house beginning to heal. Ethan was in the kitchen, making breakfast, the sound of the toaster popping a rhythmic comfort I hadn't realized I missed. Rob walked out onto the balcony, looking older but lighter, the shadow that had hung over him for 5 years finally beginning to dissipate. The lawyers called, he said, leaning against the railing. They found a second will. One Chelsea tried to destroy. It leaves everything to Ethan and a trust for my mother's care. He looked at me, his eyes wet with a shame that was slowly turning into a promise. I don't know how to make it up to you, Mom. I don't know if I ever can. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised to be fair and honest, and I saw the man he was supposed to be finally coming back to the surface. You don't make it up to me with words, Rob. You make it up to me by being the father Ethan deserves. The mystery that remained wasn't about the crimes, but about the future. Could a family truly survive this kind of domestic terrorism? As the city woke up below us, I felt a strange sense of finality. The commander was going back into the drawer. The badge would stay in the dresser. But as I watched Ethan laugh at something on his phone in the kitchen, I knew that the hunt wasn't over. Chelsea had mentioned a Miami project in her recordings. A name that hadn't been cleared yet. A name that suggested she wasn't the top of the food chain. I looked at the folder on the table, the one Linda had dropped off an hour ago. It contained a single photograph of a man in a white suit, standing on a yacht in Biscayne Bay. We had won the battle, but the war for our family's peace was just entering its second act. Every ending is just a new, more dangerous beginning. The man in the white suit didn't have a name yet, only a silhouette that haunted the margins of Chelsea's encrypted ledgers. He was the silent partner, the architect of the Miami project, and the reason Chelsea felt so invincible even in the face of my investigation. I sat at my dining table, the morning sun highlighting the dust motes dancing over the new file. Linda had flagged a series of offshore transfers that bypassed Gerald Hayes entirely, moving directly from Chelsea's secret accounts to a holding company called Argentum Equities. It was a sophisticated laundering operation, the kind that required more than just a crooked lawyer. It required a predator who operated at the highest levels of the financial food chain. I tapped my fingers on the mahogany, the detective in me calculating the distance between a Greenwich Village precinct and a high-rise in Brickell. We were entering the territory of deep-cover assets and international wire fraud, a world far removed from the domestic squabbles Chelsea used as her hunting ground. Rob walked into the room, his eyes scanning the new documents with a grim focus. He had spent the last 48 hours reviewing the household accounts, discovering just how deep Chelsea's claws had dug into our family's legacy. "She didn't just want the house, Mom," he said, his voice dropping into a hard, cold register. "She was using my firm's credentials to vouch for Argentum's credit lines. She was setting me up to be the fall guy for a multi-million-dollar securities fraud." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just her husband. He was her ultimate insurance policy. If the Miami project collapsed, Rob would be the one in the federal jumpsuit, while she vanished with the spoils. I looked at the photograph of the yacht again, magnifying the grain until the name on the hull became legible, the Sovereign. It was registered to a maritime trust in the Caymans, but the signature on the docking fees matched a handwriting sample Linda had pulled from a cold case file in Chicago. The mystery was no longer about who he was, but why he had chosen my family as his latest target. Every step of this investigation revealed a new layer of rot, a knowledge gap that stretched from the streets of New York to the shores of Florida. If you have ever felt a chill down your spine realizing the danger was much larger than you first thought, hit the like button so I know I am not alone in this hunt. A tactical shift moved us from defense to a full-scale offensive. I wasn't waiting for the Miami project to come to me. I called an old contact at the SEC, a man who owed me a favor from a racketeering case back in '09. Within 6 hours, we had a preliminary tap on Argentum Equities server. The data was a digital slaughterhouse. Chelsea hadn't just been targeting widowers, she had been feeding them into a meat grinder of predatory investments managed by the man in the white suit. His name was Julian Vane, a disgraced hedge fund manager who had supposedly died in a plane crash 5 years ago. He was a ghost, a phantom operating from the shadows of a dead man's identity. And Chelsea was his most effective recruiter. The stakes had officially transitioned from a domestic assault to a global manhunt. I watched the monitors in Linda's makeshift command center as the digital map lit up with pings from Vane's hidden servers. He was moving liquidity, preparing to dump the Argentum assets and disappear again before the New York DA could connect the dots. We had to move fast. I looked at Ethan, who was assisting Linda with the data entry. He was no longer the victim, he was the navigator, his youthful fluency with tech providing the edge we needed to bypass Vane's firewalls. "Grandma, I've got a hit," Ethan whispered, his eyes wide. "Vane just booked a private flight from Opelika to Zurich. He's bailing. He's leaving Chelsea to rot so he can save himself." The air in the room felt thin, the pressure of the clock ticking down against Vane's departure. We couldn't wait for the red tape of an international warrant. I picked up the phone and dialed Captain Spencer's direct line. "Charles, we have a flight manifest and a tail number. If that plane leaves the tarmac, the money is gone and Vane becomes a ghost forever. You need to coordinate with Florida State Police and the marshals. Now. I felt the old fire of the precinct burning in my chest, the cold, lethal clarity of a commander on the verge of a takedown. The knowledge gap was a narrow bridge now, and we were the ones holding the demolition charges. All that was left was to see who fell first. The sirens began to wail in the distance, a symphony of justice that had been 5 years in the making. The scene at the Opelika Executive Airport was a chaotic blur of black SUVs and tactical gear. Vane didn't even make it to the stairs of the Gulf Stream. The images came through on our feed in real time, the man in the white suit forced onto the asphalt, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his face a mask of shock and fury. The Miami project was dead on arrival. Back in New York, the news hit Chelsea's cell like a physical weight. With Vane in custody, her last hope of a secret rescue evaporated. She was truly, finally alone in the dark. Rob stood beside me as we watched the news coverage, his hand gripping the back of my chair. "It's over, isn't it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked at the screen, then at my son, and finally at the empty space on the wall where Chelsea's portrait used to hang. The legal battle would be long, and the civil suits from the other families would likely drain whatever was left of the Stone estate, but the house, my house, was safe. Ethan walked into the room, carrying a tray of tea, his face finally holding the lightness of a boy who knew the monster under the bed had been dragged into the light. "It's over for them, Rob. But for us, it's just beginning. We have a lot of years to make up for." The final mystery wasn't about the crimes or the criminals, but about the quiet work of restoration. As the evening sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, I realized that the badge didn't define the woman, and the crimes didn't define the family. We were the survivors of a storm that was meant to erase us. I picked up the old investigation notebook one last time and drew a heavy, black line through the names of Chelsea Brooks and Julian Vane. The case was closed. But as I looked at the three of us reflected in the window, grandmother, son, and grandson, I knew that the strongest walls aren't made of brick and mortar. They are made of the truth we tell each other in the dark. The story was finally ours again, and this time, we would be the ones to write the ending. The deposition room at the federal courthouse smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a cold environment for the final dismemberment of Chelsea's lies. I sat in the corner, a silent observer in a sharp charcoal suit, watching Julian Vane realize that his empire was nothing but a house of cards soaked in gasoline. Across the table, the federal prosecutor laid out the forensic evidence, the encrypted logs from Argentum Equities and the testimony of the nurses from the sanitarium. Vane looked at the documents, his face a mask of aristocratic boredom that didn't quite reach his twitching eyelids. He wasn't the invincible phantom anymore. He was a common thief caught in a sophisticated web of his own making. Every part of this ordeal had led us here, to the moment where the silence of the victims finally found a voice. Rob sat next to me, his presence a stabilizing force. He had spent the morning providing the grand jury with the technical details of how Chelsea had misused his firm's credentials. He spoke with a clinical precision that left no room for interpretation. He wasn't just a witness. He was the architect of his own redemption. The knowledge gap for the prosecution was filled by the very man Chelsea had intended to destroy. If you have ever watched the truth finally catch up to someone who thought they were untouchable, hit the like button so I know the scales of justice still matter to you. The prosecutor leaned in, his voice a low, dangerous hum. "Mr. Vane, we have the Shell Company records. We know you weren't just laundering money. You were selling the identities of these widowers to international cartels." The quiet, painful reconstruction of our home began. 2 months had passed since Vane's arrest, and the apartment in Greenwich Village felt different, lighter, as if the walls had finally exhaled the toxic secrets of the last 5 years. I was in the kitchen, teaching Ethan how to make the family's secret marinara sauce, the steam from the pot blurring my glasses. It was a simple moment, but it felt monumental. We weren't talking about wire transfers or police precincts, we were talking about basil and simmering times. Ethan moved with a new confidence, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by a sharp, focused determination. He had decided to apply for the police academy's youth program. He wanted to understand the law so he could protect people like his mother. Rob walked in, carrying a box of old photos we had recovered from the storage unit Chelsea had hidden from us. He looked at a picture of us at the beach 10 years ago, back when the world was simple and whole. "We have a long way to go, Mom," he said, his voice thick with the gravity of our shared history. "But I'm not running anymore." He had started a foundation in Ethan's mother's name, a legal aid clinic for families targeted by probate predators. He was turning his shame into a shield for others. The mystery of our family's future was no longer a question of survival, but of purpose. We had been forged in a fire that was meant to consume us, and we had come out as something stronger than steel. A crisp October morning brought the kind of day where the air feels like a fresh start. I stood in the community garden, the cherry tree Ethan and I had planted now standing tall against the autumn wind. The news had just broken that morning. Chelsea Brooks and Julian Vane had both been sentenced to consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The Black Widow was finally behind bars for good. I felt a strange lack of triumph, only a deep, settling sense of peace. The commander was officially retired, not because the world was safe, but because my world was finally secure. I watched Rob and Ethan walk through the garden gates, carrying a picnic basket and a blanket. They looked like the men they were always meant to be, strong, fair, and deeply connected. We sat under the tree, the city buzzing around us, a distant hum that couldn't touch the sanctuary we had built. The knowledge gap was closed. There were no more secrets, no more hidden ledgers, no more monsters in the shadows. I looked at the two of them, the legacy of my life's work, and I realized that the greatest investigation I ever conducted wasn't for the New York Police Department. It was the one that brought my son back to me and kept my grandson safe. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the grass, I realized the story didn't end with a conviction. It ended with a family sitting together in the light, finally free from the dark.
Have a story like this? Send it to us, and we'll share it with the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true family drama. Thanks for watching.